The most suspenseful chord on the guitar must be the major minor 7 chord. What the? Sounds like that old Batman TV show. Or the sus4 chord. It goes up and it comes down. Now, I think it goes to the major minor 7 chord because it sounds like a James Bond movie or some old 1960s spy show. But the problem with that chord is it's really not that useful. However, that sus4 chord is incredibly useful. It is in millions of great songs, so we want to get good at it. Plus, not only is it a cool chord, it's the foundation for so many great licks from classic solos. So let's figure out how it works. And so I say the award goes to the suspended 4 chord. Sometimes people call it the sus4 chord. And so what does a number in a chord name mean anyway? We see all kinds of chord names with numbers in them. And it's actually very simple. The number just refers to a note in relation to the root of that chord. So for example, if we're looking for a 4 on an A chord, we would follow from the root is 1, A, B, C sharp, D. So it's D, right? Now an A sus4 chord is a particular situation, and that means that the 4 is not just added to the chord, it's the fact that the third of the chord is raised 1/2 step. So when you raise a major third up 1 fret in the case of the guitar, it becomes a 4. So you take the third, you raise it a fret, you get a sus4. Let's take this basic A chord. Here's the third in that chord, we raise it up a fret, and there it is. In fact, that is a D note, right? That's one really common open chord sus4. And here's another one. What about D sus4? That's in a lot of songs. You've probably played it before. A lot of students play it all the time, and they don't even know what it's called or how it works. But D sus4, again, we just take the third, and then we raise it a 1/2 step, 1 fret, and there we go. It's a D sus4. Now we can do this in a couple ways. We could memorize the shapes because the shapes are actually quite common, so we could just memorize the shapes. But even better, if you know which note is the third of all these chord shapes that we use up and down the fretboard, then you always know you can just raise that note 1 fret. That's really useful because if we take a less common chord shape, but we know where that third is, we know we can just raise it up. So if you know where the third is, then you know where the 4 is. And if you know where the 4 is, you know how to turn any chord into a sus4 chord. Let's take a basic bar chord. Let's take an A major bar chord. This is a standard shape. Which one of those is the third? We know it's this one. It's that second finger, right? How do we know it's that one? Well, if you think about your bar chord shapes, like your major shape we have here and your minor shape, that's the note that changes when we're going from major to minor. And what is the note that changes when we go from major to minor? It's the third, a major third or a minor third. So if that's one that changes, that's got to be the third. Okay, great. So now we know what the third is. That means we can also raise it so that it becomes a 4, right? That chord is actually quite a bit harder to play. As you can see, you've got to really contort and stretch your fingers to make it work. We've got to change the fingering around, but when we get there, it is a very cool sound. Let's hear. You can strum from sus4 to the standard A major chord. I bet that already sounds like some songs that you know. Maybe a song by The Who, or maybe the Doobie Brothers, or Tom Petty, or U2. That's one of my favorite uses of the sus4 is all those cool early U2 songs. What are some of your favorite sus4 songs? Let's look at another common bar chord shape for sus4. Then we'll do some more unusual shapes, and then we'll use the sus4 sound in some solos. So when we think about our bar chords, remember that bar chords are just coming from open chords. So remember at the beginning we did this A chord and we raised the third to make it a 4 there. But this A chord, this cowboy A, becomes bar chords, right? So maybe let's take it up to a D. There we go. Now we have memorized already that that guy is the third, and so we know that guy goes up to become a sus4. We could go A sus4. We could go D sus4. The beautiful thing is that you can put this sus4 on any of those chords. Let's say we're doing 1, 4, 5 in the key of A. That would be A, D, E. We could put a sus4 on all 3 of those. Here's the E. We've already got sus chords all around the guitar. So let's use some more unique chord shapes for this sus4, because to me, that's where this technique really shines. Let's take this A bar chord and we're going to shrink it down. So when we visualize this chord, we're just going to use 3 of the notes that we're actually holding when we're holding the whole bar chord. So rather than holding this whole thing, I'm just going to hold these 3. Those 3 notes are a triad, right? They're just the essential 3 notes of the chord. The root, the third, and the fifth. And that's the third, right? That's the important one we want here to make it a sus4. So we visualize where the third is, and we just raise it 1 fret. In this case, we can just put a pinky down. Whatever's most convenient. For sure it's pinky here. Now you might have noticed what I did there. I actually played more than just the 3 strings that I'm holding, because it's an A chord, right? And we have an A string, so we might as well include that open string in the chord. Now it sounds really cool. I really like it when we have low open strings with higher up notes. They just mix really well. We could even include the high E string, right? Why not? It's an E, and E is in an A chord, A, C sharp, E, so yeah, go for it. Now let's hear that strummed, because open strings have a really nice way of blending with the chord when they're strummed. And that's another nice common technique you can do with these sus4 chords, is you can just hammer on the sus4. So we can hammer it, and what we hear is we hear the original A chord, and then the sus4 gets hammered on. And what's the 4 chord in A? It's D, right? A, B, C, D. So if we play a D chord and we play the sus4 on that, we could figure out a clever way of playing the D chord. In fact, we could take this same shape that we're using, this little triad, and move it up, right? Because A becomes B, becomes C, becomes D. There it is. Now, here's the extra magic of this chord shape, is that in this key of A, of course, the A note is in key, and also in a D chord is D, F sharp, A, so of course an A chord is good on a D chord, and guess what? We get to include that low A string again, even on this D chord. And because we knew where the sus4 was on that A shape, we know where it is on the D shape. It's the same thing. Perfect, now we've got A's and D's. But there's another way to play a D, and it's close by, and it's really great one for sus4s as well. So let's look at it. Remember that our bar chords come from also our open A shape. We did that, right? And we did this D bar chord, and we remembered that we could sus4 that D bar chord. But we also have an open string version of this chord up here around the 5th to 7th fret. Let's take a little piece of this chord again, right? We're just taking some of the notes off, and we're leaving the essential triad notes behind. In this case, I'm going to get rid of my first finger, okay? And I'm going to play just these 3 notes here. And we did say that an A note is in a D chord, so we can include that open A string in it. Now, the order of these notes is not root third fifth, but it doesn't matter, it still has a root third fifth. It's just fifth root third. But we already knew that was the third, because when we're playing this, we're imagining our open A chord, our cowboy A, and we know already how that goes to sus4. So we know already how this one goes to sus4, right? There it is. We just raise that finger or add a pinky. And let's shrink it down even more, because we do have an open D string on the guitar and it's a D chord, so we might as well use that open D string. It'll sound really great, again, to have that lower note combined with the higher notes up the fretboard. So now we have the open A, the open D, and just these two notes here left over. What a great combination. We can move from A major to A sus4 to D sus4 without barely moving. And we still get to keep these strings ringing, the A and the D. I happen to use this very D chord and the sus4 version of it in a recording by Taylor Ray called Nashville. You can check that out. It's basically B minor, a D/A down here, and then it goes exactly to that D sus4. Remember, you can add this sus4 to any major chord in any song you might be playing. Even if it's not originally written in that song, you can add that sus4 at that moment just to add a little more harmonic richness. Let's do one more shape and then I'll show you how to solo with some sus4 lines. Now this shape is admittedly quite a bit more difficult to play, but it's well worth the effort because it sounds great. So we had A open, right? We had this cool A, this little triad. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna do the next triad up for A. Now if you're into the caged system, you might call this the C shape for A, or you might call it the D shape for A, because they kind of belong to the same thing. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna use the D string, the G string, and the B string to play this shape. If you like, you can bar your first finger and get an extra note on the high E string, but I often just play those three notes, and especially when it's an A chord, because again, we've got that open A string to ring along with it. So that's the A major chord, and we got to figure out which one of those is the third so we can raise it to become the sus4. And it's this guy here in this case. It's the lowest one we're holding. Now, this is trickier to push that finger up. You could just move them up. Not too bad, right? Depending on how far you can stretch. Or you can add pinky. I think I do them both at different times. The effect of the open A string on this chord is especially great because now we have some much higher notes on the fretboard, so they ring much higher than that open low A string. And again, that combination is a really cool sound, mixing that really low with that really high. And remember, we had that D chord up here too. That's so close by, we barely have to move to get from that A chord to that D chord. And we've got the sus4 for both of them now, right? On this A chord, sus4 is there with pinky or push the finger up. And with this D chord, the pinky just goes down on the G string. And now we've got the sus4 for both of those chords. And we've got A's and D's all over the place, right? We could play A sus4 here in open position. We could play A sus4 here. And we could play A sus4 up here. So what do you guys think? Just because it's called the suspended chord, does it mean it's the most suspenseful? I do kind of think that the major minor 7 is far more suspenseful. Yeah, it really is. But let's face it, the sus4 is incredibly useful because it's in so many songs and it's such a beautiful sound. It's well worth it. So don't forget, we're going to put all the tabs on our Patreon plus some bonus lessons on how to play these kind of sus4 licks. And we'll have all these chord charts available for free for you on my website. The links to those are below. My name is Blue Morris and I teach guitar lessons here in Vancouver, Canada. I'll see you in the next one.